everybody. Welcome to Fun with Guns. Today we're going to be talking about the M1 Carbine. How exciting, right? The M1 Carbine. It was developed about 1942 to 1973 for issue to U.S. soldiers. Well, you know, there were several different variants of it, different models. The M1, the M2, and the M3, all carbines. They all looked pretty much the same. There was just slight differences in between the three. The M2 was, the M1 was automatic. The M2 was fully automatic. The M1 was semi-automatic. The M2 was fully automatic. And the M3 had a large scope on it with a big old disc on top of it for night vision shooting and sniper. Why did the military want the M1 Carbine? Well, the military wanted the M1 Carbine basically because the fighting man over in the European theater and the Pacific theater was lugging around the big heavy M1 Grand and carrying a .45 pistol or carrying a Thompson submachine gun, and the fighting man wanted something a little bit lighter that shot a little bit further than the Colt 1911 or the Thompson, and was a lot lighter and a lot less cumbersome than the M1 Grand. So they Winchester's design team developed this M1 Carbine. Accuracy, when it came out and the field manuals and everything else said that this thing was accurate up to an effective range of 300 yards. As the fighting man used this in the theaters and up in Korea, up through Vietnam and other countries that use the M1 Carbine, quickly learned that at about 200 yards, the bullets start dropping very rapidly. So it is said that these guns have a practical effective range of 200 yards, which is still all out better than the Thompson or the 1911 or whatever else that the fighting man had in any of those wars that we mentioned, especially in a jungle environment. The 30-06, I found this very interesting, or a good fun fact for you to know, is that the 30-06 was said to be 3 times more powerful than the 30 carbine round that was shot with these. But of course, the 30 carbine more powerful than the 45 caliber. It's the first major used gun in the United States Army or military history that used a primarily non-corrosive round. Originally, when these guns were developed and made and sent out to the U.S. soldier, they didn't have a bayonet lug on them. Over time, the soldiers were using the M3 fighting knives and wanted a bayonet in order to put on these for close quarters combat. And the military developed this bayonet lug sleeve that could be easily added to the gun in the field for soldiers to slap their bayonet on their gun for any close combat with the enemy. Later on, before Korea, all these guns were taken back in to be refurbished and refit for service. Bayonet lugs were found. It is said that, you know, to find an original M1 Carbine without a bayonet lug is really hard to find, like that needle in the haystack. I'm sure they're out there. They're just a lot harder to find. A flash hider was developed during World War II for the M1 carbines, but it was not widely used by the soldier. It was not even really issued till the M3 carbine came about, or used primarily. But it was used occasionally. How the soldiers got them, I don't know, and all that other great business, but soldier's a soldier's a soldier. I'm sure if they figured it out some way down the line. There was over 6.1 million M1 carbines made by a dozen or so manufacturers in the United States. Some manufacturers didn't have the capabilities of making the full gun, so some of them would just make the bolt and then send it off to someone else that was making the receiver and putting the gun together. M1 carbines were determined to be very cost effective in comparison to making the M1 Grands. It cost the United States government $45 to make an M1 carbine, where it was costing the United States government $85 to make an M1 Grand. I'd like to pay those prices today for M1 carbines and M1 Grands. I would have a building full of them. In the winter in Korea, as soldiers were using the M1 carbine, a lot of soldiers were complaining that the M1 or the .30 carbine bullet was not powerful enough to penetrate what they needed to penetrate in order to kill the enemy. Even though that these weapons could penetrate the steel pots or the helmets that were used by their enemy, it wasn't piercing some of the North Korean or Chinese's winter jackets and winter clothes that they had on. It was only going so far into them. Nevertheless, the M1 carbine stayed in action through 1973. This M1 carbine is a Standard Products Company example of an M1 carbine. You can find the manufacturer name under the rear sight. These rear sights were originally just a fixed rear sight. Later on, when it was proved that they were kind of not that accurate, they changed them up and put a sight on it that the sight slid up and down on the this slide in order to set your distance that you were shooting. Underneath that is the manufacturer name of the M1 carbine. Underneath mine it says Standard Product Company and the serial number, and you can look up the serial numbers on the internet and they'll tell you who made them. And this one was made by Standard Product Company. My barrel has been changed out at some point, in which that this barrel is marked Winchester. The date to the serial number and the manufacturer for this M1 carbine goes to 1943. Standard Product Company made about 4% of the 6.1 million M1 carbines out there. So I found that pretty interesting to know that, you know, some of the companies just didn't make a whole lot of them in comparison to what other companies made, probably because they weren't really a gun manufacturer. They just retooled some of their equipment and machinery and whatnot to make guns, which they weren't ready to make a high volume of guns like other companies were. As you can see, I put the rear magazine pouch on the butt of the gun. This was not designed originally to go on the butt of a gun like this. This was made to go on your pistol belt in place of where your M1911 magazines might have gone on your pistol belt. Soldiers in the field figured out that if they took off the sling and the stock of their gun and slid it over their barrel and down the stock and fitted their stock through there, this magazine pouch would fit on the stock of their guns, and it was just an accepted norm by the military to put the magazines on the butt of the gun. And then of course I have a sling on this side of the gun. These magazines hold 15 rounds. There's also magazines that hold 30 rounds. They're called banana magazines. Of course, there was no pouches or anything like that made for the banana magazines. So the soldiers then would take magazines end to end in order to quickly change out to have more ammunition on them. Later on, they made the magazines with clips or attachments in order to connect the two magazines together so that the soldier in Vietnam or wherever would have more ammunition or be able to carry more ammunition with them. All right, now for the fun part. Oh, one last thing. Let's talk about the ammunition. I bought this Korean ammunition at SG Ammo. I bought an ammo can of 1,080 rounds, and they came in stripper clips that look like this, and then they have the speed loading attachment on the end of the speed, on top of the speed load clips. This ammo was manufactured in Korea. There's still some countries out there that use M1 carbines today, and I'm sure that's who they make them for. Other than that, let's go have some fun and see what we hit. All right, welcome back everyone. We're going to shoot the M1 carbine today. I've already loaded 10 rounds into my 15 round magazine. We're going to shoot at about 75, 80 or so yards. I have my rear sight set for 100 yards. This is a semi Uh-oh. All right, as you saw, I hit the target, I think 9 out of 10 times, which is pretty good, I thought. Works just fine. Fun gun to shoot, fun gun to have, fun gun to own. Y'all have a good one. See you next time.